Mr. C.T Unonu. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Money and Breakfast podcast. It is great to have you here today, sir.
Pleasure is mine. Glad to be here as well.
Get right into things. You have a background primarily in education space,
Yes.
very technologically focused, but you also place quite an emphasis on STEAM, on the arts and humanities portions of that education. You've designed curriculum, you've been a classroom instructor. So tell us a little bit about your background and this particular approach to education.
Sure. So again, glad to be here. I think it would be very appropriate to kind of start from the genesis, as I'll say.
Hmm.
So I'm a first generation Nigerian American person, oldest and only son of a family of four. I have a younger sibling who's 2 years younger than me. And both of us, though born here in the United States, we did live in Nigeria for a brief period of time in our early childhood. Came back to the United States, and this is during the late 80s into the early 90s, where my
Mm.
parents were just looking to figure out where would be the best place to raise our children, and economically speaking, where would be the best place for us to raise a family. So, the United States won,
Hmm.
so we moved back to the United States, and we, being my mother, sister, and I, my father stayed back. He's a was a cab driver. He's now retired, but in my time in Nigeria as a young person, as I stated, in my time here in the United States as well, once we moved back, I've been in private school settings, public school settings. I've been exposed to a variety of communities and cultures within that, mostly depending on the time, of course, immigrant families, similar to my story, as I said,
Hmm.
but not just West African families, not just African families, literally international families. So a lot of the, if you will, the foundation of my appreciation of it, the arts, education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the intersection of that comes from just the communities I've been a part of growing up over the years. And just to get into the teaching history, if you will, so I never once thought I would be a teacher. That was never part of my plan as the big brother to my younger sister. I thought I was going to be a professional artist. So
Okay.
imagine a young boy, West African immigrant boy, saying that to his very West African Nigerian parents. So, for anybody who's not familiar with African culture, Caribbean culture, when it comes to immigrant communities in the States, even in the UK, you're either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or
Or
something,
a doctor.
or a doctor. Exactly, it's one or the other in the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
So. I had a very interesting time whilst growing up I went to a private Catholic school in Prince George's County in the state of Maryland, trying to like convince my parents of this desire, this passion I had to be an artist. However, while I was in this private school setting and I was an ESOL student, believe it or not, you may not hear it. I had an accent, a very thick one, and I used to speak my native tongue of Igbo. In that time of again being in front of amazing teachers, majority of them being women, my teachers, unbeknownst to me, saw a talent to teach. So that's actually where the journey, if you will, into education as a professional also was introduced to me in my elementary school years. I had every single one of my art teachers, whether they were a visual art teacher, musical art teacher, or even a performance art, theater art teacher of sorts, tell me like you need to be a teacher. But it didn't click for me until I entered high school and I went to a public high school, one I'm sure you're familiar with yourself, in Montgomery County public schools here in the state of Maryland. Um, by the name of Springbrook. So it was the art department, the entire art department, can't even make this part up, that gave me just a showering of love and support, not only as a student artist, but as a future education professional. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
So you've been in the curriculum design space. You've also been directly taught the classroom material.
Right.
You've also done some administrative practices as well, or some administrative functions as well. And you've also sort of been on the business end of packaging and delivering
Right.
curriculum to systems in general. In your opinion, from your experience, what are we getting wrong about curriculum design in America today? And if we are getting something wrong, whether it's at a mass scale or a smaller scale, is there anywhere in the world where you look out and things are someone's getting it right?
That's a great question. I kind of want to approach it in the kind of the reverse, so to speak. So I know the initial portion of the question started with the states. I think we need to start globally and then kind of focus in, hone in
Hmm.
on this particular country that we live in. So I think globally, and again, speaking as a person who's been educated, went to a private boarding school. I forgot to mention that in Nigeria. So speaking as somebody who's literally been in urban, suburban, rural communities, both as a student and as an education professional, I think it comes down to are the persons in power, whether they are policymakers, whether they are policy changers as well,
Hmm.
the people who are actually in the front lines instructing, or the people supporting those people in the front lines who are doing the administration, who are doing the uh, servant leadership, as we like to say as well. Are they actually meeting those specific needs of that specific community that they're in? That's like really the only question that needs to be answered. And if the answer is no, whether it's through data of test scores, as we love to do here in the States, or simply like graduation rates, which I think every country has that kind of statistical information. That's the very telling of what is and isn't happening successfully. So for me, when I think about the time I spent here in the United States and the success stories that I have and the success stories I know other people have, both as students and education professionals, it comes down to like how accessible are the things that the students need, how accessible as well are the things that the instructors have
Hmm.
need for, and also even taking it to the level of administration, are the administrators even getting the resources they need from the county, municipality, township, city, state, or in this case for the United States, federally at the federal level. So again, depending on the decade, depending on the administration, depending on who is or isn't in leadership, like all the layers of that kind of answer that question. So I won't say it's an absolute no. At the same time, I won't say it's an absolute yes, because I know there are, again, things going on right now. People are fighting. People are striving to make positive change, and people are making changes that aren't necessarily impactfully in a positive way as they thought, if you will. So it really comes down to, again, that accessibility. And you can't talk about accessibility, in my opinion, without also talking about equity, ensuring that those demographics, those populations, that sample size, if you will,
Hmm.
have what they specifically need to address the needs of the learning community, both adolescent learners and adult learners.
Hmm. So one of my favorite shows, as I told you, as I was telling you off camera, is House of Cards.
Yeah.
Political intrigue in D.C., cutthroat backstab type of politics, right? They were talking to around the time the show first came out, both Obama and Bill Clinton about the main character Frank Underwood, very conniving, very manipulative,
Hmm.
very calculating guy, right? Obama jokes and says, "Oh yeah, no, that show's real. That Frank Underwood's based on me." But Bill Clinton said something I found really interesting. He says that show is 99% accurate. The most inaccurate thing about that show is that in real life you would never be able to get an education bill passed that quickly. And
Yeah.
he was joking, obviously, but he did speak to something very real that
Right.
goes on as far as education policies there is concerned. And I think about, when you think about the U.S.'s global position as far as, being that world hegemon, being that sort of, kind of striding atop as that world power, there's a lot of risk to, trying to innovate, educationally and sometimes in other sectors and getting it wrong. So how do you balance that, in your opinion, with the need to innovate, the need to adapt to
Yeah.
sort of new learning challenges? A lot of education, I think, now is being framed in the context of global competition.
Right.
Who
Yep.
wins the next decade? Who wins the next 10, 15, 20 years? Um, with that, how do you balance those two things, that innovation and that sort of, I guess, risk management, to borrow a
Yeah.
term from another field?
That's a fantastic question. I think this is not just even in the education industry. I think all industries, right?
Hmm.
There is this aspect of when you're perhaps comparing one nation to another, or continentally speaking, this region versus this region. How are things happening if they are least industrialized versus most industrialized, whatever that means
Hmm.
in that particular era or time frame? Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say to that, just kind of thinking through my experiences. So maybe I'll put this as a preface, if that makes sense. So I, again, have had educational experiences in two different countries, two different continents, and those experiences have spanned from the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s,
Man, you're
and
old.
yeah, apparently, if for anybody who's a fantasy football person, American or fantasy Premier League person, I have a commissioner in one of my leagues who reminds me of that every day. I love the guy to life, but um, I've been in an interesting space where, for my particular generation, I don't call myself a zennial or millennial. I'm kind of the in between
Mm,
group that doesn't like labels. That's the best as I can describe myself.
right.
But For my particular generation, born in the early '80s in this case, I'm old enough to remember taking typewriting classes. I'm old enough also to remember computers being introduced into the classroom for the first time. So I've seen how, as in this case, an adolescent, where there's a quick shift in technology and the approach to prevent the divide, and the resources again are there. There's the equity and the access. I've seen how that has been beneficial, and how that has further down the line of my educational experiences positively impacted me. At the same time, and this is now me speaking more of the on the educational professional perspective, I've also seen how there's a rat race of sorts
Mm.
that can happen, where you hear about all these countries, Denmark come to mind, where they're like doing amazing things, or you hear stories of other nations, Germany, formerly divided, for any history buffs listening and watching, where after a particular civil conflict, there was a community-wide, nationwide unification, if you will, to quickly advance the infrastructure in all aspects of infrastructure, not just trade, but also education. And in less than 20 years, arguably, that change happened.
This was 1879, I believe.
Uh, I'm not that much of a history buff, so
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't quote you, but on that exactly. But just the main point I want to get across is, like, in that rat race, at times, some people will. But let me even say this more specifically. There are some communities who get it. Like, okay, we see this need to impact our present workforce of adult learners
Hmm.
and our future workforce of our young, adolescent learners. And so long as we go in this direction of investing in this thing, investing in that thing, put the right people in the right place at the right time, i.e., instructors, teachers, administrators, principals, vice principals, what have you, um, everything should work out. Like, statistically speaking, everything should work out.
Mm.
History has told us things will work out if you invest this way. But again, everybody doesn't always find themselves on the same page, so to speak, or have the same idea of like how that should look like when it comes to, again, policy making, or bills being passed, to your earlier example of the former presidents of this country. Like, I think the conflict can come up where someone has this idea, someone has a similar idea, but they don't have the right agreement, if you will, as to how to get to the same endpoint, and that could cause a delay. And I'll briefly mention this. I do understand this is going to be a hot topic anyway, potentially for our conversation, but you think about machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
It's 2025 as of this recording. 4 years ago, though, nobody was really talking about this. And this was like in the middle of the pandemic 4 years ago, 2021, if I recall. So there's a reason why now in this particular year, it's a big deal. It's because all these other countries are doing all these amazing things, and we don't want to be left behind. But like, when I think about No Child Left Behind, there were children still left behind, unfortunately. And the point, just to kind of land here, is what do we need to do? Those, again, who are in positions of power, whether you're actually financially able to invest and make things grow and match rate, if you will, or if you have the skill set to lead or guide or counsel, instruct, therapize even,
Hmm.
or again, if you are the type of person who, politically speaking, can influence the original influencer, influence people to go a certain way for a certain goal or cause. Like, what can we do again to ensure that whatever this I hate to say this term, but this is like something that'll probably connect with a lot of the listeners. Whatever the next hot, sexy thing is that people see with their eye, per se, they'll see it, but they'll get the value, like the true value of it, rather than it just being a fad. Hashtag NFTs. So,
All right.
yeah,
Well, we could talk about that another day. We
sure,
could talk about
sure,
that another
sure.
day. I do want to leave you with a quote here. This is, well, not a quote. This is the abstract to a scientific paper. I'll go ahead and read this. Described is the current state of computer science education in this country. The information explosion in science and the shift in our economy from the production of industrial goods to a greater emphasis on science and knowledge-based industries has created a discontinuity in the nature of jobs and our educational needs. Computers are not a major part of American education, but have become indispensable to the operation of science, business, and government. Many schools have introduced computers into their curriculum, but the paper stresses that these local efforts only partially satisfy the country's needs at costs that are prohibitive and unnecessary when viewed nationally. Other nations have begun the task of restructuring their systems to include computers, and it is stated that there is a national need to foster computer literacy, or the next great crisis in American education will be the computer literacy crisis. That's Andrew McInerney. That is a passage from 1987. So we've actually been looking at this problem for a while. And you know, it was funny you mentioned the typewriter classes. I remember they had moved on from typewriters at this
Mhm.
point. This is maybe 1999. The first sort of, you know,
Yeah.
typing
Yeah.
training devices that
Native
you're,
speaking.
and our teacher stressing to
Yeah.
us, if you cannot type 30 words a minute, you are going to be poor. And you know, that wasn't um it it wasn't that the entire system was, the education system was structured around that,
Right.
but there was a bit of that feeling of permeation in the air. You know, fast forward a little bit, a couple years, is that the make or break in someone's professional career? It doesn't seem that way. Fast forward a little bit further, you have there was an explosion, especially when I was leaving high school, of a lot of my classmates going to study computer science, computer engineering
Yeah.
for those, for the high salaries,
Mhm.
for the prestige, for the opportunities of growth and advancement, equity in sort of some of the biggest firms in the world. And now we see these big spikes in unemployment rates for these graduates, for these highly prestigious fields. If I could access your curriculum designer hat
Sure.
for a moment, how, I guess, what would be the strategies to building something that is more robust, something that is a good method for learning new technologies, but not does not necessarily bog itself down in a particular technology? And I think it's
Yeah.
really important, especially with, now everybody's saying bubble with AI. Now,
Mhm.
especially after the DeepSeek moment, it's like, what is the true
Right.
price of compute? Do we have the data centers for all this stuff? Do we have the electricity? I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Even the infrastructure on that note with water and green energy in mind. Yeah. So as and I know curriculum design is the hat that I'm currently wearing. I'm gonna go to the source hat of designer. So I think when I think of the word design, one of the things I think of is problem solving or problem solving. I may say things with a particular accent here and there. Um, so if we're thinking of in terms of like what is the actual problem,
Hmm.
and going to your particular point as well as reference that there's a divide in skills and a disconnect in like preparation for it, present and future job market, if you will. So if the problem is, for example, if the problem is that there are jobs that don't even have names or industries that don't even exist yet,
Hmm.
but we're trying to prepare present day students, adolescents for the most part, and even like select group of adult the workforce within the adult learner group for these future jobs. Like the problem is then how do we do that? That's essentially if you're coming approaching as a curriculum designer, even in instructional design, how can I help this particular load, cognitive load of whatever information it is for this age group, for this demographic, so on and so forth, be digestible. And there's this aspect of recall, and I'm talking a little bit of neuroscience, but I'm not a neuroscientist for the record. I just happen to take some classes for my doctoral journey, but there's this aspect of recall that we want people to have, so that when they're in the real world, when they are in the field, as some would say, those skills can immediately, if you think about Batman and tool belt, like that's,
Yeah.
or Batgirl. I mean, you even put more respect to Commissioner Gordon's lineage. Like, there's the resource right there that you were given, however many weeks, months, years, decades, perhaps ago, depending
Mhm.
on the person, depending on the laborer, as I'll say. So that's really like how you, from a curriculum design, instruction design, any sort of design approach when it comes to serving an education continual learner community, excuse me. That's how you want to approach it. Now, how to do that now, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure that out. There are some great things taking place as we speak. Literally, policies are being passed in various states within the United States. There are other nations as well, mostly in Europe and other African countries as well, that are passing policies as it pertains to, again, machine learning, artificial intelligence based policies when it comes to education and developing a future workforce. But
Mm.
a lot of communities, a lot of the leadership within those communities are figuring it out as they go. No one has the right answer because, again, right comes back to like, who are you serving? Who has the needs? What are those needs? And correctly identifying those needs, the way to make sure those needs are met through proper channels of accessibility. And again, when it comes to accessibility, the equity, like, does that mean financially we're pouring into certain type of resource, or does that mean as far as the labor force that we're pouring into acquiring the talent to meet the needs of these learners, again, adolescent and or adult learners, and so on and so forth. So that's like really where people should always be going back to when it comes to designing something, in this case instructional experiences or learning journeys, or learning experiences. Like, what's the actual problem?
Mm.
All right, problem's been identified, so what is a potential solution based on what we currently have in resource? Or if there are no resources but we know what the resources are that we need, how can we connect to those resources? Is it, again, policy making? Are we talking to, in the state of Maryland, Governor Moore and his team, or are we talking to, in the case of the federal government, President Trump's team, regarding like our particular community's needs? So
Mm. That's a great point. And you know, I want to come back to sort of the speed element a bit because so the other question I wanted to pose to you was something interesting I had heard on a podcast. So this is two guys, educators who were talking with one another. They both college professors. They teach you know, quite a few undergrad students. And, you know, like other educators, they're running into more AI based
right.
issues. Some people, you know, some people just have it write the thing. Frankly, they don't, you know, take the ideas and sort of implement it into the paper. You know, they don't. It's not a writing assistant for some people. It just writes the paper, right?
Right.
They're seeing these things. They're seeing them more and more. The prevalence is going up, and then you understand, and then they come to understand that even in situations where we don't detect AI or we cannot directly detect it, we have a strong feeling that it was used.
Right.
It's just too useful
Mm-hmm.
for most students to leave it by the wayside. So the one gentleman poses a scenario to the other gentleman that he had heard out. What if, and I just want to get your thoughts
Sure.
on this, your opinion on this, maybe from the teacher hat or whichever perspective. What if we instead we give our students assignments with the understanding that they're going to use AI, and we lean in a little bit. We say, okay, you have to use AI, and you must turn in prompts. And if your prompts look the same as somebody else's
Mm-hmm.
prompts, that's where you'll lose credit. It's about, okay, how can you use this new tool to um, to solve this particular problem, to complete this particular assignment or task or project. And you can on one hand see the merits of, like, okay, well, we're making this more dynamic, we might be able to make this more dynamic workforce. This we might be able to raise generations that are very, very comfortable with this technology, that see it as, you know, to go back to the Batman example, a tool on the utility belt, so to speak. You also might completely infantilize educationally or intellectually an entire generation. You might turn this thing into a massive crutch that people just, you know, that people cling to, that they outsource their thinking to. And again, going back to the infrastructure component, you're using a lot of water, you're using a lot of compute, you're using a lot of energy, you're using
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that water for the cooling systems. So far, I've only met one individual who, like, kind of saw uh, that energy intensive
Right.
digital venture
Mm-hmm.
problem. But he had to literally, like, take his Bitcoin mines to upstate New York by the waterfalls where it was like naturally cold. There's only so many solutions like that out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Tell me about what you think about sort of leaning in that way. Do you see merits there? Does it, you know, what are your thoughts there?
So there are a lot of great points even within the inquiry. I kind of want to start with, so, you know, there's this aspect of infrastructure, and within infrastructure, and just to be clear, talking about, even though it's an offshoot of STEM, artificial intelligence, machine learning, ML, AI, uh, infrastructure being green versus not green, and the impact of the varying communities that it touches. I
Mm.
mean, it's touching really every community on the planet, which is like hard to even believe that that's a thing now. But, you know, that's, we're having to have a more serious conversation about like what is clean, green, safe energy when it comes to the use of these types of technology. So again,
And
another
how do we make
very,
it at scale?
exactly right, and make it at scale, and make it make sense on top of that for
Yeah.
everybody, not just a person or a group of people. But yeah, I think there's this aspect of like that. There's also ethics with regard to the actual large language models. Um, and the data itself, the use of data, how the data was gathered, collected, what have you, harvested in some cases. And then there's also again intent and use. And there's something you had said earlier that reminded me of in education. I think any educator can say this with confidence. And educator, when I say educator, at least I'm also including parents and guardians. They are the first teachers
Of course.
of any human being's life when they first enter into this world after conception. So there's this aspect of critical thinking that is always going to be important. Has been important for as long as I can remember in my life, and as far as my own experiences learning to be a teacher, and in my case, an art teacher, an artist teacher, if you will. That's just historically speaking, you can't escape that. Any community, any civilization that has ever existed, critical thinking has been part of its ethos, if you will. So
Mm.
I think with these recent discoveries or rediscoveries, if you will, because artificial intelligence has been on this planet well over 60 years, in my opinion. I think there's this aspect of what are we gaining and what are we losing, and that's right now on the topic of critical thinking or neuroscience. Um, are we for the present day learner? That's adult learners who are already in the workforce who are maybe looking for jobs, like you pointed out earlier, if they are recent graduates from a undergraduate and or graduate program. How are they going to see this as an advantage in whatever it is that they eventually decide to do, or are currently doing in their professional lives? For the new learners, I mentioned earlier off camera that I have a daughter. So I
Yeah.
have a young daughter. She's 18 months as of today,
Oh,
and
happy birthday to her.
thank you. She is definitely challenging me even on how I look at technology, because again, my generation, early 80s, technology was very different. It was the CRT TVs, where you had to get the RCA cable, and you may know like a friend or a neighbor who's jumping cable from someone else's account to their account. I mean, like
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
again, I'm dating myself here, but like cable TV used to be stolen. Just to, let me say that very clearly. But like that's old retro tech, right? And versus technology that is way more advanced than what existed in my time. I played with Tiger Electronics as a kid growing up, so 2-bit or 8-bit, depending on how advanced the game was. Now you have literal supercomputers in the form of mobile phones, tablets, and the like, laptops. Even I know we have some technology in the space that we're in right now, as an example like that. That is the technology my daughter, her generation, is growing up with, more than your generation, more than my generation. So when it comes to critical thinking, I think that's like really, really, really what we also need to be, in a way, problem solving. How are we empowering people to think critically still? Not that they're not able to. We're all, I believe that as human beings, we are created, we are designed to think critically in order to not just survive, but to thrive and to help others along the way. But there are studies that already exist. Whether it's an MIT study, I think that's the most popular recent study that's been brought up, where a sample size group with artificial intelligent tools, writing a paper, a sample size group that is only using search engines to help write the paper. And that would be my generation group that I grew up
Yeah.
with. I having to find things with Boolean searches. And then a sample size group that doesn't have either, but is only going to the library perhaps and reading books and then writing their thoughts on an essay format. Like that is, of the many studies out there, a perfect example of how misuse, misguidance, or abuse and no guidance of these types of technological tools and within this education space can degenerate the ability for one to not only critically think, also to retain their own information, their own creativity that they have within them to produce, create, construct, etc. So I think that's like really the core issue of all the other issues that we're now discovering, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later on a global scale. There are people who've known about this type of technology for decades and who have been writing about ethics and writing about clean energy or safe energy as well for years. But it's what, like, I think for the majority, if you think about a scale, we're just now figuring it out and or hearing about it for the first time. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
I'm glad you brought up critical thinking. First of all, shout out to Ilya Davis over at Morehouse College, who taught a class called critical thinking, which is still one of the best classes I've taken in my life, over in the philosophy department. But I'm glad you brought up critical thinking because I really want to go back to the emphasis with you on on STEAM over versus just STEM. I had actually I was thinking about it as I was like preparing for our interview. I thought to myself that yours was the first in I think some years that I had really even seen the word STEAM
Hmm.
again. I worked at after school programs and such in college and undergrad, and you still STEAM was still around at that time. It
Right.
seemed like with COVID, STEAM
Kind of
disappeared,
fizzled away like
and
steam.
and and there was there was that of course, like I mentioned earlier, the emphasis of a lot of my classmates,
Yeah.
especially a lot of the ones who did well, um, those who those who were very very ambitious and really really wanted to make a lot of money, frankly. um, those who didn't go into finance, law, or medicine
Right.
pretty much all went into tech.
Hmm.
And there was and this is I think in line with kind of the overall an overall sort of lens that was placed on college. These are the useful
Right.
majors. These are the
Yeah.
things you need
The
to go
core
for.
courses.
I'm not, relative to cost. And now it seemed like the humanities kind of got pushed to the side with respect to tech. These are the useful classes, the classes that teach you how to make the money versus the ethics, the philosophies, the sociologies. You combine the two, and I noticed that there was very little separation for them for you. Tell me about what those benefits were, why you emphasize that so much, and should we be doing? Should we bring back Steam? Should we
Sure.
bring back
Sure.
the Steam engine, so to speak?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and funny enough, there's a very popular platform called Steam that for gamers, for anybody who's listening who's a gamer, that kind of like in a indirect way even touches on what you're talking about, because that platform in and of itself is an opportunity for independent developers,
Mm.
gamers, etc. People of all sorts of from all sorts of walks of life gather to not just be entertained and consume content, but have the opportunity as well to construct or create content as well. So again, that's not in my opinion, that's not an accident. It's more of a providence or providence, if you will. So I think what would help is kind of talking through my own experiences stumbling into Steam. I did not, but I'm not a author or co-author. I heard about it in my own educational journey. So I think where I'll begin is kind of going back to moving back to the States as I think I was a 6 or 7 year old. I never went to kindergarten, for the record. So I'm fascinated by kindergarten and the culture and history that it derives from in the country of Germany. I know I've mentioned Germany earlier, but like as a soccer or football head, Germany is a very special place in my heart and my life. But just growing up and again being in the arts, and over the years seeing like different types of computer peripherals introduced, like Hewlett Packards. I remember being in middle school and going to UDC, University District of Columbia, for a summer camp with a very good friend of mine who's one of my groomsmen when I got married, and we were exposed to an Apple II computer for the first time. This is 1990. I want to say 1995. So I forget what was the newest Apple computer at the time, but the Apple II wasn't too far behind in that particular season of our life. And also being introduced to Adobe's Creative Suite, now Creative
Okay.
Cloud. Right. So I'm saying this for the record. I started using digital media software authoring tools as a middle school student in the mid 90s on an Apple II computer in the University District of Columbia. So there's a lot there just in that one statement, that a West African immigrant, first generation American boy was able, in another one, because my friend is also Nigerian American, we were able to enroll in a summer camp program that was specifically designed for middle school students to expose them to STEM, but it wasn't called STEM plus arts at the time. It was just sciences. That's kind of how things were clumped up back then in my community, at least. And we had this exposure to art, digital media, technologies in the form of hardware and software operating systems. So that, unbeknownst to me as a middle school boy, opened up my eyes to the possibilities of being a working adult in the future, and perhaps, not guaranteed, perhaps working with computers on a regular basis, as I did in a summer camp program that I was in for like 2 3 weeks at a time. So just kind of using that as the background and kind of leaping here and there over the years, I found myself as a young student, embracing the use of technology, mainly for the purposes of constructing or creating art. However, as I, think back to like my time watching TV, I didn't there was, screen time wasn't a thing again in my day. So you just watch TV when it was programmed to show up. So if you had a show, that was your show on that one day. TGIF, for anybody that remembers that, that was like my family's night. We all sat together in front of one screen and watched something. That was something that people used to do. Anyway, that exposure to different types of media, different types of programming, you would see it culturally as well in that programming, whether it be in the television format or movie format. There was just to me anyway, as a child, there was this obvious merging of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts happening in entertainment, happening in the classroom, happening in the communities that I was a part of. I was my first teaching experience, if you will. I was a summer camp counselor as a high school student in local. This is Montgomery County Public Recreation. I'm giving a lot of shout outs to the state of Maryland and Montgomery County for a reason because
It's a fine
a
place
lot
to
of
live.
exactly a lot of my years were spent there, but I've lived elsewhere too. Shout out to California, shout out to Texas, and also places I've worked, Virginia and DC. But just over the years, it was very natural to see these things. I never actually questioned why it was happening. I just thought, okay, this is what's supposed to happen. So I think for me, now that I'm in my early 40s and again, kind of looking back and also surveying the worlds that we are in right now, it is a surprise actually that the humanities have been treated in a particular way that it shouldn't be. I think, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's one particular person's fault. I'll just
Seems overall
yeah,
cultural
it's
thing.
definitely more on the cultural side, and it's not that it's a majority of the culture. I think it's more so like whatever the flavor is, right? That's like the direction in mass people will tend to go unless they're questioning it. So where I work right now, and I'm part of the University System of Maryland, so I've been both on the faculty and staff side in higher education, where I again presently work. So at the University of Maryland, where I presently work on the staff side, but I've also been a faculty member as an instructional faculty member on the librarian side. The College of Arts and Humanities, big shout out to Dean Stephanie Shonikin and her team. They are doing amazing things. And also the previous dean there have been doing many amazing things with regard to the humanities and the inclusion of the arts in the conversation about STEM. There are many programs, whether it be through the college or the college's partnerships university wide at the University of Maryland with the College of Education, the College of Information Sciences, the College of Mathematics. Let's see if I remember the CMNS. So computer. I think it's computer science, mathematics, and natural sciences. I'm
Okay.
probably adding a word here and there. But this college in particular has numerous partnerships with other colleges that also are like minded in seeing the value in the humanities and not just the humanities, digital humanities, the pedagogy that's involved with that, the methodologies, the theories, if you will, that stem from that, and also like the impact that the humanities still has and still needs to have in these STEM specific fields. You cannot have innovation and technology without the humanities. Quite literally, if we think about Steve Jobs and Apple computers. Again, I was exposed to my first Apple device as a seventh and eighth grader in the two summers that I was in a summer camp at UDC. That was my first exposure to product placement and branding. That was my first exposure to the use of a mouse and a keyboard for the purposes of mathematically speaking, designing art. I had to, again, this is dating myself, Adobe Illustrator for those of you that are not familiar. You used to have to plot your XYZ or XYZ coordinates and know your hex codes or HTML color codes to make
Jeez.
something appear three-dimensional. I had to do that. So those math skills, those humanities and art skills that I also learned in elementary school and middle school helped cultivate my experience and really narrate my experiences with technology, my interaction as a human being, human computer interaction. That all ties in together. So you can't, in my opinion, you genuinely cannot have technology or technologies without an influence of humanities because a technology device or a technology solution is meeting a problem. And that problem exists sometimes, most times really, within the humanities. Like, how are we experiencing life equitably? Oh, I'm not having enough of this thing. Well, there's this program or there's this computer device that can help you meet these particular needs for this particular purpose or within this particular community that you're part of. So again, there's a direct connection, in my opinion, always has been with humanities, STEM, and the intersection, some call it digital humanities. But I think there needs to be more done to advocate these particular programs that are pre-existing. I mentioned University of Maryland. There's Myth, one of the many institutes that are amazing at the University of Maryland. Maryland Institute for Technology and Humanities. I believe I chopped that up
Mm.
too. Sorry for anybody I know at Myth. There's also Arts for All, which has been around for a little over 5 years, commissioned by the president of the University of Maryland, also a former dean of the University of Maryland, Dr. Daryl Pines, President Pines. Again, there are a lot of great people doing great things at for example. Um, we just need to have the accessibility for others to experience that within the humanities and its intersection with STEM.
In reference to into some of those institutes, first of all, I think it's great that you mentioned the exposure element, the access element, because two things came to mind. I remember in grad school, I think this was ethics class or what have you, one of the other classes. We go to the Hill to go
Right.
talk to a member of Congress. It just happened to be quantum computing day
Yeah.
on Capitol Hill. I was nerding out. You should have seen me. I was
Yeah.
running around. They had to, pull me away from the
You
table.
didn't
I
you didn't
left.
have the flash T-shirt underneath, did
Oh
you?
man,
Okay.
oh man. Listen, let me tell you, if I had known, left with a lot of swag, of course,
Hmm.
free mugs and pens and such, but also some good information. There was a gentleman there that told me, he's like, hey, he was, and he couldn't stop talking about it. He was so happy about the success of the program. He's like, hey, we're taking quantum computing to the south side of Chicago at like the elementary school level. The kids are loving it, boys and girls. It's an investment in sort of
Right.
like that, uh, at the nexus of being able to compete for that, higher income, higher prestige, higher technical requirement
Hmm.
position in the future. And then even earlier today, I was talking to my economics professor from grad school, and I was talking to him about like I've only taken a couple economics classes in my life, but every time I've taken one, it's been very transformative. There's a new
Right.
lens with which to look at the
Absolutely.
world. And he told me, he said, I had a very interesting experience. I think he said 23 or so. Shout out to Dr. Adam Thomas, Georgetown University, McCourt School of Public Policy, my guy. Put the hood on me at graduation. Um, he was talking about going into a maximum security prison
Hmm.
and teaching economics to some of the inmates.
Oh
And
wow, that's fantastic.
he talked about how they couldn't help but devouring the information. They were
Sure.
ravenous. They
Sure.
wanted
Yeah.
to know more. He said these people are in a maximum security jail, but sometimes he goes in for a session. They're bringing him
Hmm.
copies of the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, with certain headlines,
Right.
certain topics highlighted. They wanted to they wanted sort of an applied economic lens to what to their own situations, to their past situations, some of to sort of life in general in that way. And it's I think it's really good to see that happen at the university level there. But what do you think is the key to expanding that beyond sort of the monetary sense? Of course, federal, state
Right.
funding, it's going to be all
It's
about
important.
that at
Yeah.
the end of the day. But
Yeah.
as far as the design, as far as recruiting partnerships, as far as even finding participants, placing these things, some people would look at a program like this and say, well, based on the income of the community and based on what you're trying to teach and based on, what might be our prima facie understanding,
Hmm.
this is a waste of time. And then you go in, it's a huge success. And then some other times, you might go in with really good intentions and
Right.
some funding and talented, intelligent people running the show, and you might fall short. Tell me a little bit there about what you might think to be the keys to an effective program and partnership.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's wonderful what your former professor is doing. I made so I just again for those who don't know me very well, I have a family member who's currently incarcerated. He's my exact age. We grew up together. He was in the New York, New Jersey area while I was here in the DC metropolitan area. And one of the things in my last moments of staying in contact with him, unfortunately, I've been out of contact with him for a few years now, is that type of programming where it is knowing that you're not just being discarded because of a mistake you made or an error you made or how you were judged for your appearance, whatever that may be.
Hmm.
That there's a validation, if you will, of one's humanity. And within that validation, there's this reality and remembrance, even of I'm still connected to this community. And in this case, You mentioned incarcerated persons. That's a community. But there's also their families. They're also a community. And then there's the communities they live in. So I think what's important when it comes to general programming is again, I'm probably going to come back to this over and over again. You think of the word design, thinking about problem solving. What are we trying to actually do? What is the issue, and what is the potential resolution or goal that we're trying to accomplish? So I think thinking about STEAM, thinking about STEM is STEM's intersection with the arts, and programming. Just trying to stick to that word of adult learners in this case, or adolescent learners in the previous examples we both talked about. I think it's important to, when you're talking about um, technology based education or education technology or any like assortment of those two words, right? There's this involvement of identity within community, like who am I in all of this, and what does that actually mean? Allowing people the opportunity to actually discover that in their interaction with technologies or in their interactions with history, even when we think about like where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Like that again is a part of the humanities, and the dialogue of human history. So um, one example, and I wanted to give a shout out earlier, and as I was going through the list of departments or units, I was like, I forgot this. One of my favorite departments at the University of Maryland. So, and I've worked with them, which is why I say that. So the Department of African American Studies at the University of Maryland, which is part of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences,
Mm.
they're doing amazing things. Again, one of the many partners that my college, and I say my college because I'm also an alumni of the College of Arts and Humanities, they are one of the many partners that ARHU, we call it for short, Arts and Humanities, works with. And there's one specific program with digital humanities called Digital Black Humanities. So that would be one example where perhaps a group or an organization or leadership within an organization may not see the value in it themselves, but the fruit that it produces, the fruit that is yielded, that is actually like in the long run. It's not in when it comes to education, I think the key thing to remember is it's not always going to be an immediate thing. Um, if it were, then I think we'd have a completely different conversation. So because that is the case, that it's not always immediate, education, if you look at it like an investment, then we have to approach it differently. Then, since it is an investment, I believe it's an investment. So going back to this one example of the digital Black humanities at the Department of African American Studies, I'm saying their name a lot because again they do amazing work, and they're in numbers they may be small, but what they do is very very big and very very important. It's not just about the African American community. It is about the American community. The African American community is part of a larger community of the United States. And
Mhm.
just like we have a Latino Hispanic community, just like we have brothers and sisters who are indigenous to this specific land, just like we have brothers and sisters who are by history indigenous to other lands in Eastern, Western Europe, and elsewhere. Like our histories are what make our specific community that we're in. If we're ignoring that, we're actually doing one another a disservice. Like,
Mhm.
without giving too much praise, we have a very awesome producer here who I just met today for the first time, and we immediately just kicked it off. Like so many things that we were able to connect on, and we just met today. Like I've never met the guy before. I didn't stalk him on LinkedIn like I could have, but I just met him today. But we have a lot in common. So when I think about that, I think about the humanities. When I think about the humanities, I think about like what we're doing right now in this very specific space with these technological devices. Like you,
Mhm.
again, in my opinion, this is just my humble, honest opinion. You cannot separate the two. Like humanities has cultivated, if you will, guided, sometimes misguided, but really it's directed us as a global citizenship, and it's also guided us as a local um, community of persons to figure out what is best to meet one another's needs,
Mhm.
not just my needs or just your needs, but everybody's needs. So again, I think when it comes to that programming question that you talked about, you're essentially asking me, hey, how do we solve this problem, and identifying what the problem is to begin with, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the community-minded thing. To go right back to the note sheet here. So I've got a friend. Actually, he's an alumnus of our same program,
Yes, yes.
an alumnus of Morehouse College, a dear brother of mine. So after we graduated in 2018, I moved back to Maryland. He went on to pursue teaching. And I remember one day we were having a conversation. Guys, that was my good friends. Of
Right.
course, we already, but you keep in touch with guys. You got a group message, so we're just talking about our jobs, what's going on, and he's talking about his experience as a teacher. And I remember him saying, very matter of factly, he's like, "Oh no, bro, the kids can't read." And I was like, "Huh? What do you mean?" Like, because but because I'm coming from Montgomery County Schools
Right.
myself. It's a
Right.
very, very good school
Hmm.
system. There was a higher floor there, I think, than in most other
Right.
places. It's a place where it's a fairly well resourced place. There's quite a few resources there. So I had no frame of reference. I'm sitting here. I'm like, what do you mean the kids can't read? You teach middle school. This is far beyond the time that someone would have, learned to read, grasp the language at a certain level. He's like, no, bro. Again, straight face. He's like, no, bro. Go look at the data. And I did see that there are some literacy issues, especially since COVID. Just some of the
Hmm. Yeah.
NAEP data here. Quote, the percentage of eighth graders who have below basic reading skills, or according to the NAEP, was the largest it has been in the exam's 3 decade history at 33%. And the percentage of fourth graders at below basic was the largest in 20 years at 40%. That's from the New York Times. Recent reading declines have cut across lines of race and class. Tell me, how much of this do you think is curriculum design failure? How much do you think this is? How much is the teacher shortage affecting
Yeah. That's
these
yeah.
sort of outcomes? And how to what extent can technology mitigate, perhaps solve?
Yeah.
But I'm hesitant to say solve. I want to say mitigate, just because me personally, I think there's a risk you run when trying to solve a problem. You overcorrect and you end up with sort of a new
Yeah.
problem, a new crutch, a new sort of thing to um you've kind of put duct tape on it, but the duct tape works really, really well. Still duct tape.
Right.
How much do you think technology access, technology, the emerging technologies in general, can mitigate that, can solve that? And tell us a little bit about the sort of the access issues that might have to be solved to get that done.
Yeah.
Because, and I want to just say this too.
Sure.
The again, a lot of this is highly impact or highly influenced by COVID-19, the pandemic, the lockdowns and such. But what they found was students who were already doing well have declined a little
Yeah.
bit, but are overall still performing about where they were. The most precipitous drops have been at the lower
Sure.
ends, at the
Yeah.
lower levels of income. Tell me a little bit about what technology can do
Yeah.
there.
So I'll kind of start responding or answering the question with a little story. I'm a storyteller, obviously, in our time here. But so I think I mentioned before, I've lived in the states of California and Texas. So I taught in Texas between the years of 2015 to 2017, Northwest ISD, Northwest Independent School District to be full. And there are a lot of great men and women there doing amazing things it's a very, very big area that it covers. And I was specifically working in Justin, Texas, by the Texas Motor Speedway. So I worked in a rural community. This was, this particular group of people. I want to say my last year there, the seniors that graduated in 2017, because it's 2025 now, so it's almost 10 years, which is crazy. So they would be in their, see if my math is right, definitely in their mid 20s, if not like inching closer to their early 30s. So you think about that group, when the pandemic hit, they were already like halfway through college, right?
Mm,
Halfway through their university experience, or even halfway through a trade school. And I personally don't believe everybody should go to a college, everybody should go to a university, everybody should go to a trade school. I think you go to where you feel you're most valued, and you're able to be able to take care of yourself and your family. So that could be military, for example. But
mm,
I think about that demographic. I think about the demographic I was fortunate enough to work with when I moved back to the DC area. I worked in Southeast DC for a charter school. I won't say the name of the charter school, but because some people feel some way about it, some people don't. But just being able to work in DC schools via charter, that specific demographic is the group I worked with during the pandemic. I was actually a virtual high school teacher. Never thought that would happen in my lifetime, but I can say that proudly, and wear that badge, that I was able to be part of that front line during that time. So what I saw and what I see now, because this is, if I'm getting my math right, 2020 I started teaching, so it was 2020 to 2021 school year. So 4 years later, my then seniors in high school are now either graduated already from college or about to graduate. My then freshmen in high school are now freshmen in college for the first time. So when you think about this demographic, the previous demographic that I mentioned pre-COVID, they all kind of had the same experience when it came to like growth in their reading, math, and other skills, soft skills, hard skills, etc. And then they all kind of did. And I think and I'll just kind of focus on the K-12 experience that I had during the pandemic. So the biggest thing that I believe started the kind of the downward spiral of loss of skills or not retaining information in certain cases was the disconnect in community. You have young people who are so used to leaving their physical spaces of their homes with their parents and or guardians,
Mm.
going to see their friends. Their friends sometimes live right next to them. Or their frenemies. Let's keep it real. It's Southeast DC for a reason. So like depending on like what their experiences were up until that point, that was suddenly like stopped, and they
The
were suddenly
continuity
told
interruption.
exactly. It was not just for them. Obviously, the entire planet had an interruption like it's has not been seen in over a century. So, um, I think that definitely had a part to do with it. I mentioned therapizing earlier, so my wife, shout out to future Dr. Tami Unonu. She's at Bowie State University in a wonderful program that's social justice centered with regard to counseling. So she's been a school counselor herself and a teletherapist. One of the things we talk about now, almost 5 years later since the pandemic, is how people are still coping with
Mm.
things that they didn't get to experience at the very beginning of the pandemic. So going back again to these students, former students of mine anyway, um, the social emotional needs were suddenly not being met. How does a school district, let alone a school, solve that problem for everybody,
Mm.
including themselves? That's another thing.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
we're not even having those conversations frequently about adult wellness during that time. So, this is a pretty long-winded answer, so I will try
No,
to
no,
land
this
the
is
plane
good.
for this first part of your question. I think that again the aspect of community, and within that there's a mental health, emotional health, physical health, and for those of you that believe in something or someone, spiritual health. I think those things not being consistent, and that could mean something different for everybody. Um, Impacted already like the other facets of their lives. In this case, education. So if I'm not being fed physically, if I'm not being fed socially, if I'm not being fed mentally, again, the school serves more than two functions at least with
Mm.
social, emotional, and mental. Um, then you're starving. So we are still recouping, so to speak. We're still recovering, so to speak, in a starvation of sorts that various billions of people have experienced or are still experiencing, and they may not even be aware of it, but they're coping with it in different ways. So with just keeping things focused on education, perhaps they're repeatedly taking this one class that they just need to graduate from some certificate program, and they're just not getting it because again there was a need that wasn't met
Right.
years before when they were a high school student, or even earlier, if we're being honest, for certain adults that were perhaps also in school at the time. So I think again with COVID in mind and post pandemic, even though COVID is still floating around, but now it's like the common cold.
Yeah.
There is this need to also still address those things that were not being addressed before and are still not being addressed now. And it's like, how do we equip, in other words, our education communities to better serve students in this way? We now know and now acknowledge better probably than we ever have in history the social emotional needs that learners have. You can't, especially after COVID, you cannot ignore the trauma that some people literally experience because their loved ones that they live with died
Yeah.
the next day. Like in some cases, for some people who heard about COVID in the news, a relative passed away because of it, or maybe months down the line. Or it may not even be COVID, just the fact that there are people dying. And if it wasn't COVID, maybe it was cancer. That's a story that I have for one of my family members. Like
Mm.
that's really hard stuff. So I think when it comes to accessibility and going back to equity, one of the ways that we can equitably program, if you will, with and sometimes without use of technology, is also having an emphasis on addressing social emotional needs. through technology. And that could be a simple a check-in or a checkup. I did that with my students. We literally, the specific charter school, again, not going to say their name, but they did a great job of this throughout all their charter schools in the United States, was making sure there was a first, middle, and last period where students were being checked on. Even if it was like a, hey, how you doing? Not feeling so great. Hey, you're not on camera. Yeah, I'm, for the young ladies who had to be on camera all of a sudden and had their bonnets on, they maybe didn't want to be seen on camera. I don't have hair, so I can't really speak on that like you do, but that was a way at least to connect with students. And same thing with the teachers too, with the students. They needed that, whether they realized it or not. So I think, where technology has been successful recently with COVID in mind is the ability to create a digital community.
Be more creative with how we
Exactly,
implement
which is
things.
actually part of digital humanities. Again, I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again until people get it. But yeah, that like using a tool in a way that wasn't initially intended, flipping it, reversing it, as some people would say, and just making it do what it do. So
You know, I don't think I think it's fantastic. First of all, that they prioritize the mental health of their students in that way, and I don't think that the young lady should feel bad. I don't wear my scarf on camera either. My last question, CT, has to do with Star Wars. Star Wars.
oh man,
Perhaps
I
I'll
was
give
not
away
expecting.
a bit of my
Oh,
a
okay,
bit of my
okay.
nerdiness here. So I didn't see any of the new Star Wars movies. I've only seen like the like the episodes 1 through 6 kind of thing.
So
The
so we're
prequels.
talking pre Jar Jar Binks or post Jar Jar Binks? That's a trick question. Like,
Oh, well, okay. Episodes 1 through 6.
gotcha. Yep.
That entire side. Didn't see Rogue One or any of the new ones or anything like that. So my frame of reference for Star Wars this entire time has been this is an entire universe, an entire world where everything is super
Right.
technologically advanced, and we've got all these, we've got all this advanced medicine, this advanced travel, this advanced commerce. We're discovering all new elements and resources and all these things, and you take for granted that it's widespread in the world, in that world. And then I started watching that one show Andor
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Disney Plus,
Fantastic.
and then it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, no wait. Despite there being hyperspace travel or these amazing technologies,
Hmm.
this ability to heal and to again to heal, to travel, to communicate, to do all these things, there are still people living in abject poverty,
Hmm.
like people living in the dirt, even in this highly
Absolutely.
technological world. And then I thought to myself, well, damn, Mike, why would you think anything else would be happening? That's just how worlds
Hmm.
work in general. So, my question, to bring it back to the question,
Sure.
how do you, and I guess this might include all the hats you wear at once. When you have situations where you have a student population with a lot of resources
Right.
being educated with alongside right next to, and I think we saw a bit of this, in our shared
Hmm.
our shared high school as well. People who very well resourced, students from very well resourced backgrounds, alongside students from very much less resourced
Right.
backgrounds. Now, it's not that these two groups can't be friends. I saw a lot of friend
Absolutely.
groups
Yeah. Same.
that were composed of both of these groups, but there were conversations among students, among my friends. Is like there's certain guys where if they're not taking honors this or AP this, you never see that
Yeah.
guy. He's over there somewhere.
Hmm.
When you have all those, when you have those, that mix in school of both income levels, various levels of academic achievement, different. And I think that especially as frankly, as places gentrify, as neighborhoods change,
Right.
as sort of economic realities change, how do you most effectively educate a student population that has such broad compositions like that, or such diverse
Yeah.
compositions like that?
Again, love the Star Wars reference, and one thing I appreciate about Mr. Lucas, George Lucas, is he wasn't sugarcoating anything. Like, this is a destitute planet,
Hmm.
this is a wealthy planet, and these are all the planets and communities in between. But yeah, I, I'll start this way because this is such a good question. I'm like, where do I even begin?
How do I a guy from Coruscant, a guy from Hoth? They're at the same school.
My guy,
That's
yeah.
rich and poor, just for
Yeah, I
viewers
was
who
even,
aren't into that.
for non-Star Wars people, like even watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the original, versus the new one, Bel-Air. Like, you've got this kid in Philly, all the way now in California, and a very wealthy community. So yeah, so my thing is, despite like income based or economical differences, at our core we are still the same. We are human beings, right? We have very much not the exact same needs, but very similar needs, right? Especially when it comes to our educational experiences. So that I try to, both as an educator and even when I was a student myself, and I say was because I'm on a sabbatical right now, my doctoral journey, but in my lifetime as a student, I've never, I can genuinely say this, I've never looked at myself as a better student than somebody else. I'm just looking at myself as a person who's in the same learning environment as other learners, looking to accomplish the same thing, pass this class, whatever that class is,
Yeah,
and hopefully have fun along the way. So, just with that framework, right, and now putting my teacher hat on after putting my student hat on slash disciple hat on, um, I think it's just important to remember, like, we're in a journey together.
mm.
It is not a solo journey. It is not perhaps you are alone. You can feel lonely depending on what you're doing. Like, for, and I know we weren't necessarily going to talk about this, but like the doctoral journey, for example, on a
Oh
global
yeah,
scale, there's only, of the world's population, less than 3% or something like that is, and I'm probably even inflating the number. It's probably less than that are actual doctors, whether they be medical, PhDs, ed docs, doctor of science, whatever. Like, there are not a lot of doctor people uh, that already have their degrees and successfully, legally, morally, and ethically as well, defended their dissertation. And then you think about the cohorts that currently exist that are trying to get there. And then you think about the people like myself years ago as a kid, just knowing I really want to be a doctor. I don't know what I'll be a doctor of, but I just want to be one. And in my case, I have men and women who are doctors in both sides of my family that inspired me, unbeknownst to me. But again, going back to like the learning experience, it being fun, it being not just equitable and accessible, but like enjoyable. I think there's a joy that I've had and continue to have with learning, and learning again can be even mentoring and being a mentee. And again, we've had that experience
absolutely.
obviously in our lifetime, and look to pass that down
We
to
literally would not be doing this without that.
exactly. So that's usually where my mind goes. Like, what is the purpose? And this isn't necessarily a problem that we're trying to solve. This is more so identifying or highlighting the truth. So the truth is, the purpose of anyone's learning should not just be a self enlightenment of sorts, if you will. I believe it is to encourage and empower others around you as you're acquiring whatever information, retaining whatever information, using whatever information that is being instructed, taught, coached, what have you. I've been a soccer coach, for example, and I was sharing this with our producer here for a brief period of time, but that was like one of my most memorable, exhilarating, and tiring experiences because I was literally pouring myself into young men as I had just finished grad school and was trying to figure out the next step in my life at that time. This is my first master's program of many graduate schools that I've been part of. But like, I think about that time, and this is another Montgomery County high school, Clarksburg High School. Really great experience there in that community, and it helped that we were winning. So there's that. But yeah, just when I think about my time as a coach, and again my other times more often than not as an instructor or an educator or mentor, it's just like helping others help others so that they can also help others, and so on and so forth. I can't not mention at least like one or two Bible scriptures. So you mentioned poverty. So there's a passage in the Bible, specifically in the New Testament, that addresses the existence of poverty. There will always be poor among you. Is a very well known, famous scripture in the Gospels. So if that's the truth, or since that's the truth, like, so what are we supposed to do with it?
Mm.
We're just supposed to ignore folk and just keep it moving, keep it put. No, like, serve. Another scripture that comes to mind: the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few.
Yeah,
So I'm again speaking in terms of as both a student slash disciple and an educator. If this is what, for example, the gospel of Jesus Christ, Yeshua, Emmanuel, the Savior, the Messiah, however you want to call him, is, if this is what he's saying, we're supposed to do something with it. Like, there are many other scriptures, teachings that he has, but you really are supposed to seek and save the lost, is the conclusion of that statement. But really, all teachers are seeking to save people from their own demise of not being given the opportunity to learn. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I've been fortunate, as I said at the very beginning, to have great experiences in rural, suburban, and urban communities with teachers that have taught me, that guided me to become a teacher. And also on the flip side, as an educator with fellow educators, fellow administrators in some cases as well, where we're able to really empower our youth communities or adult learning communities, if we're by higher ed folks, and see some amazing things happen in people's lives. Sometimes immediately, but most times not. Much later in life is usually the case. So I've been fortunate to see that. And going back to Star Wars again, like that, whenever that tech was created, it was to solve a problem, because it was a way of meeting the needs of one or more communities. So if you think about transportation, trucks, and so on and so forth, we're transporting goods internally in this country, we're flying goods internally, externally from this country to meet needs. And that, even with all the executive order stuff that people are talking about right now in the news, like, it's really what we're talking about is like, how will this nation's needs be met versus this nation's needs be met or
Mm.
not. So
Mr. C.T. Unonu, I thank you for your time today,
thank you,
sir.
Mike. Appreciate you.